New Luigi favorability numbers. Yeah, Luigi 18 to 29-year-olds at a +9 favorability, 30 to 44-year-olds at a -1 favorability, 45 to 64-year-olds is 35 from YouGov. Hasan, have you dived into the potential privatization of USPS and DeJoy getting grilled by Congress yet? A little bit. I briefly talked about it, but there is, by the way, your coworkers are not going to know what fucking 4chan is, but having said that, your coworkers will, on the other hand, your coworkers might not know what 4chan is, but your coworkers are going to know what, TikTok is. And there's a shit ton of 4chanification happening on TikTok. They're going to know what TikTok is. They're going to know 4chan memes from TikTok in general. That is the unfortunate reality. Okay? I work in politics. All my coworkers know what 4chan is, unfortunately. I mean, that makes sense. TikTok will be banned soon. I doubt it. I think Trump is going to save TikTok because he's my goat.
New charges in the murder of the UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. A Manhattan grand jury has indicted 26-year-old Luigi Mangione of first-degree murder as an act of terrorism. He may be extradited to New York as soon as tomorrow. Lilia Luciano has the latest on this story.
Luigi Mangione is facing 11 charges in New York in connection with the murder of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson 2 weeks ago. Among them, first-degree murder in furtherance of terrorism.
Could you describe just how rare it is for your office to charge with first-degree murder?
They are reserved for, the most abhorrent conduct, killing a police officer, serial killing, and the terrorism is one subsection of that.
Ricky Kleeman is a criminal defense attorney.
This charge of murder in the first degree under these circumstances as an act of terrorism is highly unusual. What you have is an action that is designed to coerce and intimidate the civilian population.
Mangione was arrested at a McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania last Monday. Police there say he had a ghost gun that New York investigators claim matches shell casings found at the crime scene. Mangione is being represented by high-profile prosecutor turned defense attorney Karen Friedman Agnifilo. Before she was representing Mangione, Agnifilo discussed a potential defense strategy.
It looks to me like there might be a not guilty by reason of insanity defense that they're going to be thinking about, because the evidence is going to be so overwhelming that he did what he did.
Do you see insanity as a wise defense?
The only viable defense in this case is an insanity defense.
And Mangione is due back in court in Pennsylvania for a hearing about the extradition.
That's crazy. One might say that was the most sane. I can tell you that poll seems anecdotally correct for me. For the 35 to 40 plus, about half the people I work with are horrified and want to be on the jury, but the other half are giving looks like I would vote to acquit Lamau. I told you, man, there's a real crisis in this country. People, especially liberals, who still get their notes from mainstream press are so malleable. Like, they're shockingly malleable. They're shockingly persuadable. Like, they'll have their own perspective on this immediately. They'll be like, yeah, I don't really give a shit about this. Okay? I don't really give a shit about this, to be honest. Who cares? Like, these guys have fucked me over or whatever. And then a week's worth of people just going, don't do this. This is really bad. You should feel angry about, the chaos. And immediately they snap back to the fucking sheep-like mentality that they have. And it's, I think especially, it's liberals especially. Like, conservatives do this too, for sure. But I totally get how liberals have like snapped into this like idea that, Luigi Mangione is no hero. He is a bad guy. Fox News is already blasting that nonstop. It's like it's coming from virtually every outlet with like very minimal exceptions. Like this, my stream being one of those exceptions, maybe some other like leftist content creators and whatnot. But outside of that, every outlet has been going nutty mode in the finger wagging side of things to just make people as docile and as servile as possible. Okay? Net favorability of Luigi Mangione. At all, it's minus 23%. That's like Congress. He's still more, I feel like he's still more popular than Congress, which is kind of funny. But yeah, for the 65 plus year olds, it's like, see yourself out of this conversation, you old bitch. You already have like the closest to socialized medicine as you can get. And your understanding of the world is dramatically different than like obviously 18 to 29 year olds and the future that they see for themselves and the way things are totally fucked up for them. And it's pretty funny when boomers are just like, oh, excuse me, I don't know why anyone would get mad at a healthcare CEO. It's like, oh yeah, that's weird. As you said yesterday, if the 18 to 29s had what the 65 pluses have, the numbers might look the same. Yeah, exactly. If they had Medicare for all, they'd have a very different attitude. Right now, it's Medicare for only the fucking boomers. Yeah, Luigi Mangione is more popular than Congress, so fuck it. You feel me? Congress approval rating is at 19% and its disapproval is at 74%. Is Kai doing okay? Yeah, she's perfectly fine. She passed the fuck out. Look, she ran around all morning. Tired her ass out. Yeah, Luigi Mangione is more popular than Congress, okay? The more you are old, the more you are evil. Yeah, I don't think it's like every old person. I'm not going to say that. But a lot of the old people that responded to these polls are just truly, truly evil. Even if they're not, I think their better judgment is clouded. Whenever there's an opportunity for them to basically write something on a poll, they just go with like the absolute worst possible choice. It is what it is. But yeah, it's ironic because, Medicare also is impacted, for the record. Medicare is also severely impacted by privatization initiatives as well. We've talked about Medicare A, B, C, D. I think it was A, B, C, and D. There are privatized aspects of Medicare that also suck. And it's really interesting that these guys probably don't comprehend that because they're too old. But obviously, the broad majority of people get this coverage. So on their... the ones that do get this coverage are like, why would anybody do anything about healthcare? Healthcare is great. Anyway, so, but yeah, Luigi Mangione has officially been charged with a terrorism charge, and there is a lot of analysis on the terrorism charge. In New York State, first-degree murder is exclusive to peacekeepers, like, EMTs, firefighters, and cops. It's mostly just for cops. So the normal murder is considered second-degree murder in New York State, as far as I understand. But there is an additional factor here that the district attorney of Manhattan, Alvin Bragg, decided to add on to it to escalate this into a first-degree murder charge because this is a second-degree murder that was conducted to do what they consider terrorism. And this might have been a mistake. I personally think it's a twofold mistake. One, because now the main focus of this investigation, the main focus of this court case is going to be healthcare. Now, healthcare is going to be discussed. Okay. So that's number one. And number two is that given this overreach, it gives the defense attorneys more opportunities to basically pick it apart and create plausible deniability. Or not plausible deniability, sorry, reasonable doubt in the eyes of the jury. So it's unnecessarily difficult. I think the prosecutors themselves has made this more difficult for themselves. So if you can prove second degree but not first degree, does he go free since that's not the charge, or am I dumb? I think that I don't know if there's a separate charge. I actually don't know. I'm sorry. You're dumb, chatter. Sorry. Wait, what? I'm dumb too. I don't know. This is a Wall Street Journal, Marketplace, Guardian writer who says, I just want to editorialize here and say that choosing this route will backfire on them. They chose terrorism so they could increase the murder charge, but what that does is bring up the ideology behind the shooting, and if they're going to try and defend healthcare insurance abuses on ideological grounds, they will absolutely create a far worse situation in public opinion that already exists. That's what I think as well. That's what I said as well. I think like putting healthcare at the forefront of this, and saying like, well, this guy was like terrorizing private healthcare. Like his goal was to, scare private healthcare insurance CEOs, like for-profit healthcare insurance CEOs. In the eyes of the public, it only expands the message. I think it makes that message more resilient. Having said that, however, who knows? Boomers do have a proclivity towards law and order, snapping back into law and order narratives, and also personally getting invested in the idea that like, well, this was a murder, it's bad, murder is wrong, it's bad, without ever factoring in the reality that like a healthcare CEO on any given Sunday has done egregious crimes, like far worse than the singular act of murder, even though the system itself basically makes that kind of crime invisible and normal. So, yeah. Also, on top of that, judging by the metrics of just like terrorism, like what are the things that you can point to in terms of the terrorism? Yeah, he wrote a manifesto. So there's that. That's like one piece of evidence, but every other thing that you can point to is completely outside of his control. You know what I mean? So I don't know. And it's not like he published the manifesto either. So who knows? But any act against those in positions of power in this country, from murder to, I don't know, like work stoppages even, is a dangerous precedent to set if you're considering like any action against like a person in a position of power in private enterprise as an act of terrorism. Well, that's definitely going to be an issue later down the line. An issue for you and I, not an issue for those in positions of power, of course. But I do feel like this is a bit of a over-leveraged, overextended situation. Not over-leveraged, but overextended situation. Maybe a reach, if you will. So like saying the manifesto is an admission of a crime is like saying rap lyrics are an admission of crime. It's all art. Yeah, I mean, good luck with that one. I said this yesterday, but you didn't see it. This will also backfire because terrorists won't be seen as Arabs anymore, and manufacturing consent for bombing the shit out of the Middle East won't be as easy anymore. No. I do find it really strange. That like you have white supremacist shooters that openly write manifestos to do like hate crimes and shit, and conduct lone wolf style acts of stochastic terror that directly say that they're doing this because they want to instigate a race riot or a race war or whatever. And in most of those circumstances, they do not get slapped with the terrorism charge, right? There are certain instances where they have been, but in many of those circumstances, they don't get slapped with terrorism. Now, those are different states that they're prosecuted in. Obviously, New York is different, but it is kind of crazy to me. I do want to dive into that a little bit. I do want to try to figure out if these are, if there are, you know, other instances where someone has done like a very clear act of like a domestic terror, as opposed to what this guy did, as opposed to what Luigi Mangione did. So, hey, Hasan, I was wondering if you're worried about censorship over the next 4 years. The next 4 years, brother, censorship is here right now. Censorship has never gone away. Censorship has always been a prominent fixture of any sort of criticism against Israel, any sort of criticism against the U.S. State Department interests across the board, but especially against Israel. This is something that I've always talked about. And it's really interesting that most people just simply didn't understand what the hell was going on with Israel-Palestine. So they never truly had to contend with this censorship. That's why a lot of people now, when I talk about BDS and like 30 plus American states being banned or being barred in some way, being severely restricted in some way, they're shocked by it. Like when they first encounter this reality, they're like, that's crazy. You can't be serious. Like you can't do a boycott against a fucking foreign nation. Like that's wild. So in any case, I guess my rule of thumb basically is like, my rule of thumb basically in this situation is like, I didn't feel fearful. I didn't feel like this person was, you know, if this person was at large, I would not have felt unsafe. I mean, he literally didn't even kill any of the witnesses on scene. He openly stated that he wasn't interested in using a bomb. He ruled it out because he didn't want to kill like random people on accident. You know what I mean? So I guess for the extreme centrists, like it makes sense. If your position across the board, is that like the system is good and it's just simply designed the way it is, and if people die in the process for profit healthcare, then they die, you know? It is what it is. We have actually segmented out this violence to the best of our ability so that it seems invisible, so that it seems normal, and this person actually you know, struck back against said violence, and therefore he must be squashed, he must be killed, he must be jailed permanently because that is disruptive. There are a lot of people who feel that way, for sure. There are a lot of people who would rather have the stability, the law and order, people who love the notion of law and order and stability, even if it harms them personally, this very same system, they simply would rather prefer the absence of instability that is disruption, that is disruptive to the regular order of business, because they are fearful of change. That's what it is. Wormfather333, thank you for the 10 community gift to subs. Do you think it's valid to cite Daniel Penny in any and all conversations regarding Luigi? I mean, I think Daniel Penny also has a importance here as well. Law tip, it's a plea negotiation tactic. The terror charge is meant to coerce a plea by offering a guilty plea to second degree in exchange for dropping the terror charge, in my opinion. Yeah, that could be the case. Biomart, you're right. But I still think it's a failure overall because it still hyper focuses. Like it still makes his ideological motives the centerpiece of the conversation, and it's also harder to prove in general. And overall, if you are doing this for ideological purpose, if you are doing this because you want to show people how unjust the healthcare system is, the for-profit healthcare system is, then yeah, having the conversation center around your motives, motivations is obviously going to play into that. I still, however, believe that this is a very dangerous precedent. I think that you'll see a lot more terrorism charges slapped against, like, climate protesters, activists of the like people that are genuinely disruptive. It is much more difficult to slap terrorism charges, or it's much less frequent where terrorism charges are dished out to actual white supremacist domestic terrorists. And you will understand exactly what I'm saying. If you protest police, if you protest, the fossil fuel industry, if you protest any number of different things that make money in the United States of America, or at least is a mechanism of control, you will get slapped as, you will get branded as a terrorist. That is what the government truly fears. That's what the government fears more than the actual white supremacist domestic terrorists. Like, they, every now and then, they do a little bit of violence, and the violence is actually really, I mean, it's horrifying, right? But in their perspective, it's just like, yeah, okay, well, they killed some black people in a church. Who cares? Like, we'll prosecute this person. We'll do our job. But overall, that is nowhere near as disruptive to the regular order of business. White supremacist acts of violence are not disruptive to the regular order of business in the way that, like, someone waking up a lot of people to the reality of for-profit healthcare is. Does that make sense? Especially because, I mean, this is the same principle as to why Republicans regularly hit that line of talking about black and brown people. You see what I'm saying? Shitting on black and brown people, shitting on marginalized people is not disruptive and is actually beneficial for those who have a stake in continuing the way, the regular order of business, in continuing this corporate oligopoly, this corporate oligarchy. Because that kind of stuff actually focuses your attention. And when we all have a finite amount of attention to give to things, every single time you focus on, the race war that's happening in America, or how bad trans people are, you are no longer paying attention to who's actually taking your money, who's actually robbing you blind, who's actually controlling the mechanisms that we exist under. The real challenge for Luigi will be proving that evidence about the healthcare system is relevant to a judge. Even given the terror charge and the government claiming that is his motive, there's a lot of discretion to the trial court, and it's unlikely he'd be able to bring any of that in. I just don't understand then how can they make the argument that it's terrorism without diving into the shooter's background and motive. Biomart, our law tip, Andy in the chat. Do you know about ag gag? Same thing. Showing the animal agriculture industry is disruptive to business is treated as terrorism. Yeah. I do know about ag gag. Yes. Terrorism is intended to coerce a populace or government action through violence. Populace does not receive the same zealotry of defense from the legal system as government actions do. Yeah. Yeah, Dylan Roof was not. The Department of Justice charged Dylan Roof with murder in the commission of a hate crime, but not domestic terrorism. The Department of Justice charged Dylan Roof, the white 21-year-old man who allegedly gunned down 9 black churchgoers in Charleston, South Carolina on June 17th with murder, attempted murder, and use of a firearm, all in the commission of a hate crime. Attorney General Loretta Lynch announced the charges on Wednesday afternoon, but the DOJ did not charge Roof with domestic terrorism or include terrorism in the indictment. Some media outlets, lawyers, public figures, and activists have called for Roof to be charged, not just with a hate crime, an illegal act motivated in whole or in part by an offender's bias, but with the separate label of domestic terrorism, because it was a white supremacist act of domestic terrorism. The overarching goal here wasn't simply to commit a hate crime, even though that was obviously a major goal here, but every single act of white supremacist hate crime is often done at the behest of sparking a race war in the United States of America. Some people will openly write it in their manifestos. Other people will not, but they are operating on that same boundary. So hate crimes motivated in whole or in part by an offender's bias, but with a separate label of domestic terrorism, did not come in, even though there was a hate crime statute applied to it. Critics contend that the label of terrorism is too often only applied to Islamic extremists and not white supremacists or anti-government anarchists. Many were outraged after FBI Director James Comey balked at the term during a June 20th press conference, telling reporters he didn't see the murders as a political act, a requirement he designated as necessary for terrorism. Roof's crimes certainly seem to fit the federal description of domestic terrorism, which the FBI defines as activities that involve acts dangerous to human life that violate federal or state law, appear intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. Roof allegedly told a few friends that he intended the murder of the parishioners, attendees of the historically black Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, to start a race war, while his online manifesto, verified by the FBI, confirmed his motivations to intimidate and assassinate. He took his inspiration, among other things, George Zimmerman's 2012 shooting of Trayvon Martin, the Confederate flag, the KKK, and skinheads. It turns out there was one major obstacle in charging Roof with domestic terrorism. The crime does not exist. Now, this was all the way back in 2015. As you know, there's no specific domestic terrorism statute, said Lynch during the press conference to announce Roof's indictment. Even when the USA Patriot Act post 9/11 redefined terrorism to include domestic crimes, the provision simply allowed the government to investigate more broadly what it called terrorism. Actually, charging someone with domestic terrorism remains a separate matter. Even criminals who use bombs or send money to ISIS or Boston Marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev are not charged with a crime of terrorism. Teen pleads guilty to terrorism and murder charges. So since then, there have been people like, I believe this is Ethan Crumbly, right? Yeah. Pled guilty to 1 count of terrorism causing death, 4 counts of first-degree murder, and 19 other charges stemming from November 30th mass shooting at Oxford High School. So since then, and obviously there's a distinction between state charges and federal charges. Obviously, on the federal level, this is what we're talking about on the federal level for Dylan Roof. But for Ethan Crumbly, there was a terrorism charge. So since then, they've actually started applying, at least in certain states, domestic terrorism as an additional factor. So there are instances where they have charged people, like mass shooters and whatnot. And, you know, I think that regardless of the political motivations behind, or the political the political application of terrorism as a legal definition is utilized by the state to oftentimes torture people, deny them due process and the like, or slap on additional charges, or do things that you normally wouldn't be able to do to a regular civilian. If there is some kind of tangible domestic terrorism application, then yes, domestic terrorism as a practical application fits certainly fits the criteria for many of these white supremacist, neo-Nazi school shooters, mass shooters in general. So there is that. And I wanted to dive into a little bit more of, different instances where people have been found guilty, or people have gotten the terrorism designation slapped on to, mass shootings and whatnot. And I feel like the criteria being general harm to the overall public makes it a little bit more difficult, in my opinion, for terrorism charges to stick to Luigi Mangione, because he, like, I think his argument overall, if I'm thinking about it, like, it's going to be difficult to prove that he wanted other people to also go out and like kill CEOs. That's number one. Number two, there's a direct through line of like harm that was done to him in the way that he saw it, and it's more so a revenge killing, right? At most. Does that make sense? Like, it more so fits the purpose of like, it's premeditated murder, but a revenge killing rather than an act. It's an act of vengeance rather than an act of terrorism. Whereas if you're going into a school and shooting a bunch of people and saying like, I'm shooting a bunch of people in my school because I want like, I want to incite violence, and I want, or I'm going to the better case would be the Buffalo mass shooter that went into a location where he knew that there would be black people and specifically wanted to shoot as many black people as possible. And oftentimes they will openly state that their desire is to, wake America up to do a race war, right? Like that in and of itself, I think is more so in the pocket, regardless of terrorism, domestic terrorism being this arbitrary charge. If that makes sense. Yeah, fair shooting in Texas. El Paso is another example of this as well. He explicitly wasn't advocating for a policy. He literally said, I don't know that shit. I just know I was wrong. Then all of America has been wrong. So I'm going to shoot the CEO of the healthcare company with the biggest market cap. Straight up normal murder. Yeah. So ultimately, I think it is. I think it has a silencing effect, because when you slap on terrorism charges to something like this, you inevitably are saying like anyone that is even covering this in a non-critical manner, or people that are in favor of this, are all terrorism supporters. And there's a whole bunch of additional things that there are a whole bunch of additional things that get added onto it, in terms of like expanding the surveillance state, and maybe additional charges that are brought up against, what is this? No, not the California state of emergency, and not the 20v1. There was another person who actually sent me a link. Oh, Cornell, Article 490, crime of terrorism in New York State. New York State's definition of crime of terrorism. A person is guilty of a crime of terrorism when, with the intent to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, influence the policy of a unit of government by intimidation or coercion, or affect the conduct of a unit of government by murder, assassination, or kidnapping, he or she commits a specific offense. This is in the state of New York, the crime of terrorism. I mean, it's a definitely a dangerous precedent, I think, in terms of like denying other people their civil liberties, denying people their First Amendment rights in general. I think that you can use this as, this can be seen as expansive and broad and purposefully vague, in my opinion, where you could just simply say, well, this is someone who is a terrorist. So if you've said something, if you've given money to a GoFundMe for the shooter's like court case, you're technically, funding and facilitating terrorism, things like that. And it's kind of funny because obviously every single person has been wronged by whether it's their ISPs or whether it is for-profit healthcare or whether it's a airline company or whatever. Like, it just, the normal process of capitalism and the constant profit seeking creates corner cutting, creates worse products overall, worse products that you're paying for and oftentimes paying more money for, right? And in that process, you get mad. And like, obviously, it doesn't have to be murder in this regard, but like any kind of anger that you demonstrate in that process is just terrorism now. Like you are not allowed to get mad at this shit at all. It's terrorism. Meanwhile, those very same fighting words or far more severe threats are often done not against corporations, but against other fellow Americans, and there is no prosecution for that whatsoever. Does that make sense?
Extradition tomorrow morning. We will be there. The district attorney said that he has indications the defendant may waive that hearing, meaning waive the extradition, and at that point he would be brought to New York, but that if he continues to fight it, his office, the DA's office, is prepared to press forward, meaning that
they just did it to have Hasan defending a terrorist. My friend, this is not the first, nor will it be the last time that I talk about someone who has been historically branded as a terrorist, and was not actually a terrorist whatsoever, or was not a bad person whatsoever. The argument I routinely bring up is obviously Nelson Mandela, which apparently people have no response to. And instead they've chosen to just be like, did you know that Nelson Mandela was on the terror watch list? Like they don't even respond to it anymore. They just like repeat what I'm saying, but in a sarcastic tone, in like a silly tone, in an effort to deflect. It's very weird. So, like I've said over and over again, the designation of terrorism is often very, it's already arbitrary. There is no legal consensus on this. There's certainly no international consensus on this. And this is one of the things that the rest of the world actually doesn't even follow suit with the United States of America on. Like, that is part of the reason why you don't see every single country declare Hezbollah as a terror organization in the way that America has, right? Because they're like, even in Lebanon, Hezbollah is also a political party within the parliament, right? So there is definitely, there is a lot of, there's no real consensus on this matter whatsoever. And people kind of just go off of vibes.
he would push the governor, who has said already that she intends to issue a warrant for
The new meta is to just call it disingenuous and say that it's bad faith to use Nelson Mandela as an example. Disingenuous. Why is that bad faith or disingenuous? If the argument itself is about like the political application of the terror watch list, is it just that it hurts your argument? So instead of trying to tackle the argument, you just say disingenuous? I don't think Chatter agrees. That's just the meta. No, I know. I just think it's funny that these guys have no counter argument to it. So they just kind of say it's disingenuous to try to like deflate it, I guess.
the extradition, and that would eventually bring him here 30 to 45 days.
We'll keep following it. Lilia, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
The investigation into the management.
Yeah. Does it not make it harder for a conviction? Only on the first-degree murder charge, but that's it. So, yeah. Wisconsin shooter gets the killer white male image makeover. Natalie Rupnow, the 15-year-old girl police identified as a Wisconsin school shooter who killed. Oh, my God. They did it. They did it again, bro. Shooter killed a student and a teacher in a deadly rampage. Looks like she knew how to handle a firearm, at least according to the first photos that surface of her online. They did it. They did it again. They can't stop themselves, man. They can't help themselves. They did the Zach Fox tweet again. How will they argue Luigi cores the civilian population without making it seem like the ruling class is a special caste? I mean, that kind of is the attitude that people have. It's just vibes based.
Madison, Wisconsin school shooting that left a student and teacher dead, 6 others injured after a 15-year-old girl opened fire. Alex Perez is in Madison with the latest. Good morning, Alex.
Hey, good morning.
Wait, what did Zach Fox say? Zach Fox once famously tweeted out this jet ski photo and was like, I don't know where the Zach Fox tweet is. Maybe someone can link it in the chat, but it's like, basically making a joke about the media and how they cover like white serial killers. Like if it's a black person that's like stolen a Skittles or something and then got shot and killed, they will literally use like the worst possible image of that person to make them seem like they were a thug who deserved it. And then if it's like a white person that like literally serially murdered their entire family and maybe other families as well, and then ate them, they'll post a photo like this. Yeah. This is how the photos be looking at headlines on a white man kills his entire family. They'll always humanize the perpetrators when the perpetrators are white. They will always dehumanize the victims of like police brutality, even if they are victims themselves or perpetrators themselves when they are not white. It is a very glaringly obvious bias that plays a role in manufacturing consent. Because the reality of the matter is white people are a part of the in-group. And therefore, we have the capacity to understand that when a white person does something, it does not reflect poorly on the entirety of the white population. But when a black person does something, the idea is that it reflects poorly on the entire black population. Just like when an undocumented migrant commits a heinous act, right, of murder or sexual assault, people so willingly will turn around and be like, this is how undocumented migrants are. That's 12 million people. What the fuck do you mean this is how? 12 million people from every different part of the fucking planet. How can you literally say this is how all undocumented migrants are? That's insane. That's an insane statement. Like there is no, any group that is a marginalized group or a minority group, like a trans person, for example, will do something. And that's all of a sudden a reason to hate all trans people. That's just how racism works. That's just how it is. And this is part of the problem, or this is part of the analysis with respect to like anti-white racism. Whenever people try to like bring up anti-white racism charges, okay, where we all understand that like not every single white male is a fucking school shooter. You know what I mean? Even though the overwhelming majority of school shooters are straight white men. But you don't operate with the same fear that like the next person that you see that is a white man is going to be a school shooter. It just doesn't work that way. No, stop saying I mean or they are. You're fucking stupid. When you say stupid things like this, when I'm in the process of making a fucking argument, I know that you're like sarcastically saying it or if you legitimately believe it, but I'm talking about the broader society. Most people with the social conditioning that they have do not have the capacity to apply racist dynamics to the in-group. That's just how it is, okay? You can try as hard as you want in this chat to be like, nah, that's how it is. But that's not how it works in the real world, okay?
Morning, George. Through her social media, we're now getting a better picture of what the 15-year-old may have been thinking in the moments before the shooting.
This morning, the search for answers. Investigators closely sifting through 15-year-old Natalie Rupnow's social media account.
For the record, the best possible example of this is if we're going to talk about like a 50-50 split between men and women, okay? The best possible example of this is when a woman is called a whore or when a woman is objectified, right? Hypersexualized and shit on the virtue of their of them being a woman, okay? That is a damning statement against all women. But the opposite doesn't work in the same way, no matter how hard people try, okay? For example, if you were to turn around and say like, oh, all men are trash, people get mad at that, for sure. But most people do not have this understanding. That's not a real thing that people truly believe. That like, when people say, oh, men are trash, that this is a damning statement against all men across the fucking board, no matter what they've done. People just simply don't read it in the same way. And that is because there is a shit ton of social conditioning and a shit ton of normalization of the notion that like women are supposed to be objects of sexual desire. And so many other things that compound on top of that, okay? And the reason why I use the male-female dynamic here is specifically because, like, it's almost a 50-50 split, regardless of patriarchal constructs that have historically dominated women and still have remnants in contemporary American existence, in contemporary Western existence.
Hoping to figure out why the teen shot and killed a teacher and student at her school, injuring 6 others.
Identifying a motive is our top priority, but at this time it appears that the motive was a combination of factors. We're talking to students to understand whether bullying was one of those multiple factors.
Police say the shooter brought a handgun to school and opened fire in a study hall classroom Monday. Many of the families at Abundant Life are Pastor Brian Peterson's parishioners, including one of the survivors.
What she had to see, no child should see, in that she was right there in the room when it was taking place.
Investigators digging through the shooter's digital footprint, discovering posts made in the minutes before the shooting.
We are working to authenticate the documents that you see online that some are referring to as a manifesto.
James Smith's daughter is a junior at Abundant Life. He says it's a refuge for many students who struggle at other schools.
Those who have been disenfranchised or bullied in other situations and saying, well, you can find love here. You can find acceptance.
I could only imagine.
Overnight, a vigil at the state capitol remembering those who were killed.
Honestly, it's still kind of hard to think and feel feelings because of just how incredibly emotionally and mentally taxing that experience was. You never really realize how much something like this will affect you until it happens.
And authorities have collected evidence from the shooter's home and say her parents are cooperating. Michael?
All right. I want to reiterate something that I've talked about in the aftermath of the first attempted assassination against Donald Trump and also the successful assassination of Brian Thompson, the UnitedHealthcare CEO. Most mass shootings that are commonplace in the United States of America are not actually conducted against people who are responsible for the pain that people have experienced, okay? It's not actually directed at a vector of power and control. It's almost always directed at random individuals that are either on the same class structure as you, that exist in the same class structure as you, or are lower I guess, in the social categorization, right? Mass shootings are normalized and considered to be a natural occurrence, almost like treated like an earthquake or whatever in the United States of America when it's punching down, when the victims are oftentimes some of the less protected members of society. And that is because these sorts of mass shootings are not disruptive to the pre-existing hierarchy. That is the reason why what this shooter has done, even though she was directly, and there's enough evidence here to point to this, directly a part of a terrorist telegram called Terrorgram, whose founders have been arrested by the American state, by the FBI, for committing international acts of terror, including the mass stabbing incident in Turkey. The person that did that, by the way, she mentioned in her manifesto that there is not, like, this is not considered or packaged or talked about in the same vein as an act of terror, a stochastic terrorist who was goaded into taking a white nationalist stance and then inevitably engaging in an act of cruelty and an act of terror, specifically because there is this like underlying interest in sparking a race war. Raid from Paroles d'honneur, French decolonial media. Oh, wow. Oui, oui. Welcome to the French, to le French. Hope you had a good stream. Paroles d'honneur. Bonjour. Oui, oui. C'est vrai. Nique la police. Okay. There's a far left channel. Yeah. Just like I always talk about like permissible bigotry and the appropriate vectors of violence and hatred. This is yet another example of this, right? You write legislation that is against healthcare, for-profit healthcare, you are branded as an enemy by corporate media. Okay? You try to disrupt the military-industrial complex and its profit motive-backed, its profit-driven agenda of violence globally. You are branded as a terrorist. You are a bad person. On the other hand, Donald Trump can run on a campaign of creating concentration camps for 20 million undocumented Americans, undocumented migrants that live and work on U.S. soil, and nobody reads that as terrorism. People even turn around and yell at you if you say this is fascism, even though it is a one-to-one comparison to fascist leadership of the past, historical fascism, and the way that it has evolved throughout time. It's like identical to Hitlerian policy, and yet people go, whoa, let's have an argument about this. I don't know if this is correct or not. Okay? You call everything fascism. It's like this guy literally quoted Adolf Hitler and wants to do Adolf Hitler's policy. It's ridiculous.
The House set.
Just something to consider for many people. Hopefully, this will be helpful in getting you to understand how social dynamics play out. But let's move on to some more damning news that is also kind of funny. Matt Gaetz. This is not technically fash debate. Make me want to scream. Yeah. Ari Nahari, thank you for the 10 gifted subs. Also, Jabri is mad because he was working on a Matt Gaetz video and And he was hours away from releasing his Matt Gaetz video